Hi and welcome to this video in the MRDCL Central Working Smarter series, and in this video we're going to be looking at importing project and project data from SPSS. So if you have a project in SPSS that you want to import into MRDCL, it's a fairly simple operation to get script ready-made and your data ready-made so that you can start to use MRDCL immediately without having to enter all the text again. And I think this is quite important because many of the data collection platforms, particularly the online data collection platforms, are outputting data in SPSS format these days, perhaps even more than SSS. And it's a really good way to output your data from your data collection platform, read it into MRDCL so that you can start working on it immediately and start producing tables without having to key in text or without having to make any variable definitions even. So let's look at how we do this and look at some of the things that you can do. So I'm going to go over here in MRDCL Central to the plus sign down here where it opens up the import tools in MRDCL Central, and I'm going to click on the SPSS logo here. First thing it's going to ask me for is what type of import am I performing, and you'll see there's quite a list of different imports that I can do here. Now the most basic one is run without a CSV file, and what that means is it's just going to do a very basic import from SPSS. Now that's quite important to understand. One of the things that SPSS does that is not particularly helpful when you want to analyze the data in other software is it typically spreads multi-value variables across a number of fields. So for example, if question 3 has 10 responses, it will quite often store that in Q3_1, Q3_2 through to Q3_10 for the 10 possible responses, storing that data as, if you like, true and false for 10 separate fields. Now when you come to analyze that as a table in MRDCL or in any other software, to be honest, you probably want to see all those 10 responses on one table and have that pulled together as one variable, so it's conveniently going to come out on one table, whether it's used as rows or banners or columns on a table. So if you run without a CSV file, it's going to read it in its sort of native state in SPSS and give you 10 variables which are just trues and falses. So if you want it put together as sort of a multi-response question with 10 answers, perhaps as where there's which of these brands have you bought, where there's 10 particular brands or maybe even 500, that would be fine. But if you wanted it as one variable for an analysis, which is more common, you'd want to have some controls in place to handle that. Now the most common way of doing that is to use the running US CSV option, and we're going to click on that in a moment and have a look at how you can control how MRDCL imports your data so that it's there in the form that you want in MRDCL for analysis. Now there are some other options in here to control variables in that sort of way, and I'm going to quickly go through those, although I would advise you to read the full documentation if you think you have one of these types of forms and your data in SPSS conforms to some patterns. Now the first one on the list is reading variables in so that where they have colon separators and variables with a multi-choice question, that's a rather specific format that is been added to MRDCL recently, that is fairly rarely used, but is used, I think, from one software package. The more common ones are below, where you might have conventions for the variable name. So if you use underscore followed by a numeric, i.e. _1, _2, _3, for multis, you can click on this one if that's always true. And if you have any rating statements that are in grids, such as rating of brand 1, rating of brand 2, rating of brand 3, with some responses where effectively they're separate variables, and you've used underscore a letter A, B, C, D for that grid, this would be the option that you would choose. Conversely, if you've got an underscore numeric for the multi, but you've got an underscore letter and the data's in a spread field. Now a spread field is where data is stored across a number of fields, as a multi, that would be an option you could use. If you've got numerics as a spread field, underscore as a grid for letters, you can use that. And then the next options here are those other permutations. So if you're using conventions in your naming variables and they're strictly true for every single variable in your file, you can use one of these options, although I would advise you to read the full documentation to make sure you've understood that so that it imports correctly. I'm going to start by running without the CSV file just to see what that produces, and then go a step further and look at it with the CSV file. So I'm going to select this. It's telling me that if it finds a variable called weight, it will use that for weighting purposes, which I think is a good, again, another good default. If you've got any weighting in your SPSS file, it's a good idea to call that weight so that then MRDCL will automatically use it without you doing anything. And now let's import that file. And here's the file I want to import. Now ignore the screen on the right. I'm going to talk you through that in a minute. I'm just going to click import here because I'm not going to use that information on the right hand side of the screen. And it's imported. And here you can see the STP file that it's generated. And you can see it's a properly annotated STP file. It's got all the text in there. It's taking that from SPSS. Now, when you get to question 2, which I happen to know is a multi-response question, you can see what it's done. It's made a separate variable for each item. So Q2_1, which is what it was called in SPSS, has got picked up as not ate at a restaurant and ate at a restaurant. For the next response here, which is Q2_2, it's not went to see a film, went to see a film. So it's not in its most useful form, if you like, for handling multi-response questions in this particular case. However, one thing you will spot if you scroll down, you can see here that it's made anything repetitive in the script into data statements in MRDCL. Now this is really useful because what this means is if you wanted to edit this script, so for example here we wanted to put a top 2 box in for very good and quite good, that would just be one line of code, whereas pretty much every import I've seen in every other bit of software, if you wanted to apply that change for top 2 code for all that list of, what is it, 20 variables there, you'd probably have to do them one by one, which would be a very laborious exercise. Here, MRDCL lets you just edit 1 or 2 lines of code and you'll get your top 2 boxes that you want for every variable because it's put it into efficient MRDCL script. And it's also generated a basic table for every one. If you wanted a banner here, you could define that banner, put select banner in, and every single variable then would be analyzed by a banner of your choice. So really quick from getting from an import straight through to tables by a banner, for example. I'm not going to run that because I'm going to do the import where question 2 is handled a bit better than it was here, rather than lots of single options. So I'm going to do it again now. And this time I'm going to choose the run with the CSV and talk you through what that involves. So I'm going to pick that file again. And here's the file. And now we're going to look at the CSV file that's on the right hand side that it's going to use as part of the import. Now if you look at this, you can see that most of the variables here it's going to use, but Q4 I've already changed it to ignore. So if you don't want question 4 as part of your import, you want to ignore it, you can just put ignore in there. And sure enough, if I added ignore into here, it would ignore Q5C. But Q2 is interesting because you may remember that was Q2_1 to 4, which were imported before as 4 separate items, as 4 separate variables. Now, by putting the word begin in here and type in the word end in here and give it, if you like, a combined variable name of Q2, it will import it as one variable so that when we come to analyze it, those 4 answers at Q2 become one answer, so much more efficient. So now if I click on the import procedure, I now get an STP file where Q2's imported as one variable, much more convenient. And now again I get all that efficient script, of course, as before, And if I just want to get the tables by total, I can click the run command here, and I'll get all my tables by total. Or I could just input very quickly here a banner of age and gender, for example, select that as my banner, and I'd get every table analyzed by banner. But I'm just going to run it in total here because I'm only demonstrating the import. So let's run it, click OK, and it's run my tables, and it's just finishing those for me. And I can now view those tables. So let's go and view them. And sure enough, if I view those tables, there they are. Only 3 respondents, but you can see it's imported question 2 as one variable. Ate at restaurant was 1, went to see a film 2, and so on. And all my other questions have also been imported cleanly, so that I've got a set of tables which I could quickly run by a banner if I wanted to, and my import has been successful. So that sort of introduced you to the difference between importing without a CSV file, but also using that CSV file and creating it. There's an overwrite facility if you want to start again, but what it means is if you get more data in a SAD file, maybe there's more records been added, or you get another wave of data, you should be able to reuse that CSV file, because that CSV file will have stored my list of variables in that CSV file, so that if I import another time, I can just use it again, or I could slightly update it if there's some minor changes, or perhaps I want to hide some variables and ignore them. So thanks for joining me on this video. I hope I've shown you how easy it is to import data that you perhaps output from your software collecting data, or you've just have a project in SPSS into MRDCL, so you can make use of MRDCL's more powerful data tabulation analysis facilities. Thanks for joining me.